Welcome to the WoW podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories and insights from our university community. Tune in for conversations about growth, success, and the power of communication in the academic world. So get ready to soar with us on the wings of wisdom.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is your host, Mohsin Ben Said, and welcome to another episode of Wings of Wisdom, the WoW podcast. Today, for this special episode, I have two co-hosts, Dr. Andrew Roble. How's it going, Andrew?
Great to be here. Thank you again, President Peede.
Thank you. And the wonderful WCC coach, Chelsea Allen.
Hi, Scene. How is everything going?
Going very well. Glad that you managed to be with us today.
Oh, gosh, me too.
Yeah, wonderful. Would you like to introduce our amazing guest?
It would be my honor. Our guest today has dedicated his career to championing the humanities, higher education, and public service. With a background in publishing, federal leadership, and university administration, he has held several influential roles, including serving as chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, publisher for the Virginia Quarterly Review, and director of literature grants at the National Endowment for the Arts. His career has centered on expanding access to education, fostering intellectual diversity, and supporting the arts and humanities. Now, as the 31st president of Ashland University, he brings a wealth of experience and a deep commitment to academic excellence. Please help me welcome President Jon Parrish Peede to the Wings of Wisdom podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you. Look forward
We're happy to have you. Yeah.
Thank you. Look forward to the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. What an honor. I know amid your very, very busy schedule, you made time for us, and we feel very honored.
Absolutely.
That you are here with us today. So, President Peede, this starts with your undergraduate experience as a student. What made you choose Vanderbilt for your undergrad studies?
Well, when I was an undergraduate, of course, the internet didn't exist. You could get in your car and drive somewhere if you negotiated that by phone with an admissions person. And but Vanderbilt was the university I wanted to attend. I applied to, I think, 2 or 3 other institutions, but it meant something to me in the way that Ashland means something to other families. My father was the son of a steel mill worker in Birmingham, Alabama. I don't know that he would have ever gone to college if he hadn't been in school under some very tough nuns. And they wanted for him an education that honestly his own family was, I think, largely indifferent about. And so he was the first one to go to college, and he became a surgeon. My mother's family, my grandfather ran gas stations across the South. He helped set up a gas station, and they had a very nice middle-class life, but no one had been to college. And my mother went to Emory. And so both of them went to fine institutions, and I applied to both, but only wanted to go to Vanderbilt. And I think a lot of us, we hear from our families members that our lives were transformed somewhere, and we want to go there. And one of the great parts about Ashland, I talked to somebody who has had 9 family members. I talked to somebody whose family signed the original charter to create the university in 1878. And I think all across the country, whenever we hear these stories about higher ed and institutions are out of touch with the rest of America, we need to remember that many of us live in families that were transformed by universities. And so I had that experience. My family did now across 3 generations. And I know I have talked to Ashland graduates that at a minimum 6 generations of their families have gone here. They remind me they started at Ashland College. So the real question becomes, what do we come to school to study, and then what do we lead to study, and that's a part of my story and my journey too.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. Could you expand on it a little bit? Because I think initially you were going to study medicine, and then you switched to literature and humanities, which I could, say that was a wonderful change. But like, what brought you there?
Absolutely. Well, both my parents were in medicine. My father was a surgeon. In fact, he was a very minor uh, person on the larger team that did the first heart transplant in the world. It was
Wow.
Dr. Hardy's team in Jackson, Mississippi. So this was medicine at its height of technological capacity in the world. My mother became director of medical records at a hospital. So I worked in hospitals. My first federal job was full-time work in the summer at a VA hospital. And here was the thing. I was just at the best, very average in the sciences. And I love books. I love writing poetry. And it was my junior year of college, really the last semester of my junior year, where I said to my parents, my heart's not in this. And I switched to English, and I think I took something like 36 hours in my last 3 semesters of college. So I do not recommend to students to try to start a whole new major in your last 3 semesters. But it worked. What I realized, and I would say to our students and to our alumni, and just frankly everybody's trying to figure out where they are in the career, that one, I was trying to be true to myself, what was my own skill set. And at the time, it was not an unreasonable decision for entering med school. There are 2 majors that across a generation have been the highest level of acceptance: biology and English. Usually English slightly higher for nationwide for acceptance into medical school. What was interesting is later, when I became a federal funder of the humanities, I had and my colleagues had a real role in funding the medical humanities across the nation. And that was a nascent field. And there's something called the Jefferson Lecture. It's the highest level of humanities lectureship in America, but funded by the federal government. Congress literally sets the amount of payment to the scholar. And I picked the Professor Rita Sharon, and she has an MD from Harvard, and she went back to Columbia to get her PhD in English because she believed there was something about the treatment of the body and the patient that wasn't fully covered by medical school. And so she essentially created an entire field of study called narrative medicine, which runs somewhat parallel to medical humanities. And so what's the through line here? Be broadly educated. It'll allow you to have a deep and fulfilling career. Don't silo your mind. One field bleeds into another. What I learned in those hospitals, what I miss about not having medicine in my life, is I loved hearing the stories of people. They would tell you everything you wanted to know about their family. If I was just in there to take their blood pressure as a orderly or to bring in fresh towels, they would introduce me to their kids and their grandkids. My deep love of community was awake in the halls of hospitals at people at their most vulnerable moment. And whatever we can do to reclaim community, we should. And it just turned out that my hospital was a campus. And if I'm so fortunate, it'll always be a campus until my retirement.
Thank you so much for that great answer. And we really, really appreciate especially your empathy.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Chelsea, by the way, is a wonderful example of a college student who is well-rounded and seeking that well-rounded education. I know, Chelsea, when you just joined AU, I think you had a couple of different majors, and
Yeah, I actually came to AU as a biology major, and I switched to sculpture. So I'm working with metals now. I'm a pharmacy technician, and I'm starting a business. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad I didn't compete against you for this presidency. And that's great. And I'd like to say, oh, that's all Ashland. What it really is creating an environment so your true self can come forward. As professors and academic staff, yes, we need to have discipline level knowledge, right? We need to be able to convey knowledge in our fields, but also the importance is to leave enough space for you. I had somebody, a very fine poet, Dana Joy, a great American poet, point out to me about why poetry that we love, that lasts for centuries, it often has enough space between the lines so that our own stories can enter it. And also if you were in an institution that wasn't as liberal arts driven, I worry that you would be told by well-intentioned educators to say, no, you have to pick something. You have to narrow yourself. And that seems absolutely the opposite of this is the age when you explore instead. I think of something, statement I quote often. Zora Neale Hurston, great novelist. She wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God. She was also a folklorist. Because she was African American, she wasn't able to have the faculty appointments she might have had or research dollars she might have had. And she was absolutely serious as a creative artist and as a scholar. But she said something that I think resonates when I heard about your background. She said, research is formalized curiosity. And if you ask me what I'm in the business of, I'm in the business of curiosity.
And it's people like you and like Ashland University that have fostered everything that I've been able to do. So it's a great environment that it has been created.
Well, thank you. I'm fortunate in the team we have.
Yeah.
And now, President Peede, your focus was on Southern literature and storytelling, right?
Yes, and it seemed odd to me. It's the idea of getting a degree to study your own family, as it were. But when I finished undergraduate, and I had, as an undergraduate, the Kaplan company had asked me to teach the LSAT. So I think when I was 20 or 21, I was teaching night classes on taking the LSAT, and I didn't I wasn't interested in law school, but I was interested in the function of logic, and logic's what underlies the LSAT. And so I was looking around to see, am I going to get a PhD in American literature or in American studies? And in my native Mississippi, at the University of Mississippi, they were starting a program, or had started it, for Masters in Southern Studies. And again, it's as if you're getting a degree to study your own family. It seemed redundant, but it was led by this wonderful photographer and blues scholar and folklorist, the great Bill Ferris, who I just saw a month ago. And I studied with him for 2 years. They had one fellowship, so I was his fellow. And he was appointed by President Clinton as chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So he and I are the only chairs to have one study under the other. And we were going to his university. He's just retired recently, in recent years, from the Chapel Hill at North Carolina. And I was still chairman, and he introduced me in this kind way. And I said, I look up to Bill. I edit books. He writes books. I fund things. He does those things. And so I said, there's already a hierarchy between us, my great mentor. And then the month before, he won 2 Grammys for his work. And I said, you didn't have to do that to me, Bill, But that's also instructive. He was appointed by President Clinton. I was first appointed by President Bush, asked to stay at the Arts Endowment by the Obama administration, and later brought back by President Trump. And I say to people, if you don't have anybody in your life who has different politics from you, or different points of view, or different cultural experience, then I think there's something lost there, and that's also what drew me to Ashland, is that I love the kind of respectful dialogues from differing perspectives that we have. I think that makes it much more like the world outside. And, a campus should never be a monoculture that is in conflict with the world. It should be a home where we might learn how we might improve the world, and in the process, of course, of improving ourselves.
It's beautiful. You mentioned the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Yes.
What was it like stepping into the role of the chairman, especially with all the budget uncertainty at the time?
Sure, I did. I was the first, and to this moment only, chairman that had ever served since that agency was created about a half century before I served there. Only chairman to ever serve under the president who had recommended the closure of the agency. And while I won't go into the White House interviews, the one thing I will say is I said to him, if it is the will of Congress to fund it, and I knew it would be, and it was the will of Congress, that when I run something, I run it, that there's no halfway measures, and that I would run it in a way that I thought that Congress could support, the American public could support, and that the White House would understand. And we were able to do that. So, I funded anything from the Thomas Edison papers to the Thomas Jefferson papers, the Martin Luther King papers, but also brand new scholarship by humanists across the country. So annually, about 1,000 professors or academic programs or projects were funded. And that was a wonderful experience. And I can say that that the White House learned what I was funding when the general public did. So there was no requirement or expectation that I'm pre-checking it. And so that independence was important to me. And so it was one of the great pleasures of my life. And I have the personality of a middle child, which is try to get along, and sometimes, let's just say the House under Pelosi and the White House under President Trump, they had different perspectives. I think that's, an understatement. And that agency found a way to work collaboratively with both. And so I credit the team we had.
Well, we are certainly grateful for your leadership, past, present, and future. And you just talked about some of the initiatives you worked on. Can you talk about something that you spearheaded that was really, really near and dear to your heart?
Sure.
About?
I can tell you two, and I'm going to back up to the National Endowment for the Arts, because one thing I would want to say to our students and to our professors is sometimes you have to lean into something and you don't know what's on the other side, and you have to give your all. And one thing that I was fortunate to do at the National Endowment for the Arts is to be at the start of creating the Big Read program, where we have one city, one book programs. and later was the director of that program. Ray Bradbury was part of that, of course, wrote Fahrenheit 451, and Ray and I worked on a documentary in Culver City, and just to be with him. And sometimes it's not just what is said, but who's saying it. And so he would say he was in his wheelchair by then, and it was about. I spent 7 years helping our troops write therapeutically about their wartime experience. So I've been in Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Bahrain, Persian Gulf, and about 30 domestic bases and international bases. And we were coming together to film the firsthand accounts of the troops, their writing. And because it was in California, in Culver City, we asked Kevin Costner to join set one day, and Ray Bradbury one day. And the troops, Ray was the star to them, not Costner, who was very nice, but it was Ray. But he said about his own career and his own philosophy, he said, sometimes you just have to jump off the building and build your wings on the way down. And that was so powerful. And yet he was methodical too, and revised too. And but I love that. But the project we were working on called Operation Homecoming, we started that in around 2003, and it now exists as a research component at the Intrepid Center, where they're looking at arts therapy to help troops recover from TBI, traumatic brain injury, and PTSD. And so that will always be something great. The book of their writings was edited by the historian Andrew Carroll, and the film that came out of it was finalist for an Oscar. So that was, and I know you'll have to shorten my answers, but editing. But how did that begin? Did that begin with a great congressional request? No. Did that begin by our remarkable chairman, Dana Gioia, saying we're going to put 10% of our budget here? No, it began with a convening of the 50 state poet laureates coming together, and some 48 of them or something were there, and a daughter of a Tuskegee Airman. So this was the all African American World War II fighter pilots. And then she was a pacifist, Marilyn Nelson. And she said she was teaching at West Point as a visiting writer, even though she's a pacifist. And she said, John and Dana, my cadets are going off to war, and I don't want to happen to them what happened to my classmates after the Vietnam War when we were all young. And Dana said, well, John can probably get some writers together if they'll kind of keep their politics off the base, right? Don't make it partisan. And they can talk a little bit about the importance of unburdening your weight and your anxieties and even possibly your trauma through writing. And we'll see what happens. We'll get some Department of Defense to give us access. We thought it would be a short war, as you can imagine. And 7 years later, I was still doing that project. So think about it, a bar, maybe a Holiday Inn, of one poet turning to another poet and saying, can't we just do a little something? And now it's part of a research protocol for recovery from wartime experiences. At the Department of at the National Endowment for the Humanities, we were a very nimble team, and the Department of Education was a large team, not so nimble, but they had a great deal more money. So at the NEH, the Humanities Endowment, if you don't spend your money, it just rolls over to the next year with some caveats. The Department of Education has a lot of money, has to be spent the particular year it's in. So the Department of Education came to the Humanities Endowment and said, if you want to go forward with your idea about the importance of getting students back to civics teaching across America in K-12, you can use our money. So the U.S. Department of Education transferred money to the NEH, and we ran a competition and brought a broadly intellectually diverse, ideologically diverse group together. And we created Educating for Democracy And within, say, 18 months, there was an entire roadmap for including what would a roadmap to K-12 civics education be. We also drew the right line, which is the federal government can pull these resources together, but the federal government has no business in creating a federal curriculum. That's a state and indeed local matter. But we could say you should have knowledge of the founding documents, which is, of course, where Ashbrook has been for more than 40 years. And we could say we believe you ought to have some understanding of the formation of your state. You should know the Bill of Rights. You should know how our Constitution has allowed dissenting voices to be incorporated into it. What was Frederick Douglass able to do? What were the suffragettes able to do? So that roadmap helped educators think through what they'll actually teach in the classroom without any federal intrusion into that teaching.
Thank you so much for that lovely answer. And when you pass by the WCC again, you'll get a chuckle when you see the sign above my door that's from, as my son calls, Nice Guy Mosine, with the message that you'll laugh when you see it.
Good. Now I have a meeting or two I'm sure I want to get out of, so maybe I'll stroll over there.
Anytime.
Wonderful. President Peede, this is a question we got from an audience member. So the listener would like to know what the transition was like for you, transitioning from leading the NEH to becoming the president of Ashland University, which is, I would imagine, a big shift, right? They'd like to know what drew you to this new role.
Absolutely. I said in one or two kind of public moments that I've been fortunate in my jobs. I've had jobs because it seemed like the next step. I've had jobs that it was just sheer ambition, right? That I think the third person I ever wrote a speech for was Laura Bush, and the fourth person was President Bush. So, I thought, okay, now is the next thing going to be a White House speechwriter or something like this? And I think I did good work along the way, but it was often centered on climbing in a career, trying to get support. Washington, you're always trying to build coalitions around your ideas or yourself or what have you. And along the way, you can do a lot of really good work. But I am also a person of faith. And we might have funded things such as the Martin Luther King papers that I think we highly elevated someone whose faith transformed a lot of our country. But it wasn't an act out of my faith, let's say. It was a funding decision in a secular government role. When this opportunity at Ashland came, I experienced it differently. It was my wife who said, "You're letting this deadline go. You need to go forward and apply. You say you want something like this. And basically, why won't you, send it in?" And I don't just mail a generic cover letter. I mean, I'm obsessively saying how I fit every little, nugget. And well, I think I hesitated because it was a calling, and I'd never been called before. I'm married to a minister. We've been married 30 years. And so I've watched Nancy's God's calling. I've even resigned from jobs so that we could follow her calling by God. And there are two fears when the thing you so deeply desire unknown to yourself. One is that you won't get it, and the heartbreak of the not getting it. The other thing is that you will get it. And I thought I might do 2 or 3 different jobs on the back end of my career. And in accepting this, if the university will have me, it's more likely than not that I'm in my final position. If you leave an organization that you're not called to, you try to help them out, but then you move on to the next thing. One does not walk away with a calling casually. And so it's the deep sense of responsibility. There are lives of students here. There are faculty members who have moved here, who have stayed here, turned down offers to be here. And I wake and I sleep every night with that deep sense of responsibility, knowing I'm human and I'm going to make mistakes, hoping, praying indeed that my mistakes, that we'll be able to mitigate them, right? And at the same time, you can't be paralyzed in your decision making. So the difference, I have more employees here, but spent, a great deal more money annually in the federal role. They're both political jobs at the end of the day. You're trying to get people to work together while respecting their differences, including their differences with you. And I say over and over, I do not want a monoculture. If no one disagrees with anything, then what do you stand for? And so it's continuity and change. The real difference was when we gave a transformative grant. I funded the C.S. Lewis Library going to Wheaton College, for example. But I never went to the campus. I never laid eyes on the books. It was one of, if I funded about 1,000 projects a year, and 1 year in the COVID year, thousands beyond that. So if you approve a grant every 3 hours, 365 days a year for almost 4 years, you're pretty far away from the experience. Here, I walk out the door, particularly now that the sun's out this week, maybe not today, but this week, and I see why we're doing this. In a federal office building, I was pretty far away sometimes from why we're doing.
That was beautiful. Wow.
Chelsea, do you want to follow up with the question?
I can't. I think I'm speechless.
Yeah, that was a beautiful response.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Katie. Okay, I'll go with this. What excites you the most about leading Ashland University right now?
I enter a lot of spaces, publicly, people know what I look like or what have you. I like that students will come up to me in an event and say, I'm not sure why this university policy was changed for that one. I love that they feel comfortable doing this. I like in a room where I get to be a little bit anonymous. My wife joined. She was on a panel at the seminary for female ministers or professors, and they were talking about 4 Christian mystic women, and that was great just to sit in the middle, 60 people deep into the audience and just kind of take it in anonymously, and that was kind of wonderful. I'll give you a moment where the students do a 24-hour play where they basically kind of stay up and they write an original play, and evidently they let some of the actors sleep while they kind of set up the props or whatever, and they have it. And this, which has become a bit of a tradition on campus, this started, as I understand it, out of a student project. I don't want to misspeak if it's a student undergraduate thesis, but and the young alum who started it, she came back for that night, and that was just wonderful. And one of our board members and his spouse were sitting in the row in front of me, and it was slapstick, wonderful, murder mystery kind of, like a British murder mystery kind of thing, and so. I love to see the creativity, and it keeps me young.
Sounds like it means a lot to you to be a lot closer to the things you're impacting rather than a little bit more removed from it.
It does. We'll sometimes talk about higher education and someone will say, oh, you have to, get off campus, to be, quote, in the real world, and the idea that somehow we're not in the real world. And you look around and the volunteers on the school boards, that's the volunteers at the public library, the people running a book sale or volunteering at a food pantry. Those are all our employees, our students, our faculty members. And so the way I look at it is it's the world coming together in this very compressed, 100 and something acres. And in a time where too much we're disappearing in our technology and our cars, the idea that in a course of a week, I'm going to wave at 100 to 200 people that I don't know the names of. They're anonymous students going somewhere. I may only next time I see them might be in a graduation 2 years from now, and but it sparks a bit of joy, and we take it for granted. And I think we have a lot of fellow citizens that would do anything to have be in the presence of anonymous warmth.
And that's really special, and I could testify to that. I just saw you taking a phone call outside of Bixler, and a student waved at you, and you stopped talking on the phone, and you just waved and said hello. And both of you had such great smiles on your face, and it warmed my heart.
Thank you. I'm expressive. It must have been a moment I was getting good news. Now that the weather's nice, I am trying to take some walks. If I'm going to take a cell phone call anyway, why not exercise a little bit and be fully present, as much as I can to the campus too.
Yeah, there's definitely a revival of the community spirit with you around, and the fact that you, I think I can say this for the rest of the campus community. You feel accessible to us. I think
Yes, absolutely.
that's a blessing.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say, and I'm trying to hit that level of being accessible without and say, how about this idea? One thing I really want to compliment the faculty on, it's so important to say this, is I want them to know I'm here to listen to them, and I'm going to ask about things. But what I really love about this faculty is they're not hearing that as, wait, you want to intrude into our business, so if I'll ask me, what are you teaching? What textbook are you using? If I happen to know that field, or what novel you're teaching. And they're hearing it as somebody who's intellectually curious, as opposed the way it could be heard is saying, well, wait a second, is he starting to look in on my curriculum? Because that's a fine line. That's a faculty matter. And if I could say what we have here at Ashland, and I think so many others would wish they had, is we begin in mutual respect and transparency, and to come to a campus and have that as a gift given to me. And yes, I feel a responsibility to keep re-earning it in some ways, but it was freely given. It's not like I got here and changed a mindset. The faculty said, of course, we think it's okay if you're intellectually curious about what we're doing. That's probably not universal, right? So if you think I'm open and accessible, it's because it's easy to be open with somebody who greets you with a handshake or open arms.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, and very generous of you. and you mentioned you are in the business of curiosity, right? So what advice would you give to students who are trying to balance career ambitions with their intellectual curiosity?
Well, I know that we're going to be limiting our choices. I didn't have very large student loans, but I came out with student loans. And, sometimes you're making career decisions that are economic, and you think, oh, I'll follow my heart in 2 years or 3 years. And we all have a little bit of that, but I would, my recommendation to the students would be, your career is often only going to clarify itself in retrospect, in hindsight. Now, for two of you, as a professor, so you have an undergraduate experience, then you get a master's, you get a doctorate. There's a progression that you're either going to be an academic faculty member or academic staff member. And that looks orderly. And as we know, that has its order. A lot of us that might have university lives is very different. So I'm 55 now. I had my first real professional job at a university when I was 24. So 30 years. I've had, let's say, 6 major jobs. I've never done the same thing twice in my entire career, and I don't know that I ever will. So what I can tell you now, and I say in interviews, or did say a year ago in an interview, what I am is a storyteller and an editor. An editor isn't telling you his or her life story. I know I am a little bit here, but my job is to take the university story and share it. And yes, you shape it. You try to find an audience. I would accept, as a young book editor, my first job, I would accept somebody's project. They might get tenure over that acceptance. And I would give them 2,000 corrections to a 250-page manuscript. And they would think, oh, I thought you liked it. Gosh, why do you hate it? I said, no, that's not how editing works. There's something in you that is still inside you and not yet on the page. There's something you said brilliantly, but you said in a way that only 25 people can understand it. And that's not the audience that we're looking for with this book. And so the hand of the editor should be anonymous. I'm going to be here and have this presidency, but ultimately my fingerprints should be invisible. I'm trying to share this story, not become the story. And it's just a different mindset. So all these jobs, at the end of the day, I was a storyteller, but I didn't know it at the time. I was just moving from place to place, somewhere either teaching writing, developing writing and digital properties, or funding them. And history centers and Ken Burns films and things like that. But that's where curiosity led me. And so for a lot of our students, that will be their path too. There are a lot of philosophers, not a lot, but a number of quite successful stockbrokers have come out of philosophy, for example. There's a Nobel laureate who teaches at Yale, and he created generally the concept of narrative economics. He believes that he looked at the stock market crash, for example, of the 1920s, and he said you could think of it differently as a contagion, that it's not just what happened in the industry, is that people collectively thought all was lost. And he compared that with the Great Panic in the late 19th century and finding that the emotional reaction was different. Now, I've reduced and oversimplified his idea, but we'd be surprised how much an election or the stock market or other things are driven by a narrative as opposed to mere data points.
Can I ask you a really difficult question, if you don't
Sure.
mind?
Sure,
Okay.
please.
So my favorite author is McCarthy. Who is your favorite author or poet? And you have this vast experience, so
Sure.
it might be hard to just narrow one down.
Yes, and you're talking about Cormac McCarthy, yes?
Yeah.
So I studied under the first professor to ever write a book-length book on Cormac McCarthy, and then I studied under a writer at the same university who wrote the first scholarly article on McCarthy. So I started collecting him in the late 80s at the recommendation of these professors, actually. And even when I was in Vietnam working on a landmine removal project for a museum, I actually bought a lot of original McCarthy's from the 80s in Vietnam. So he was, globally understood in some ways before he was in America. Faulkner and Robert Penn Warren are, and again, very close to home, Faulkner being a Mississippian. What's telling is the two great world writers also had, Faulkner looked to one and another looked to him. Faulkner looked to Tolstoy because he said Tolstoy is telling the story of what was considered the Russian peasant, to use the phrasing of that, an agrarian society in a feudal world, if you will. And that's what he believed Mississippi was before and somewhat after the Civil War. Gabriel Garcia Marquez took his experience in Latin America and looked to Faulkner. All three of them have long books with long sentences, but they're all variations on three agrarian culture societies, and spanning, if you take the last Marquez's published in the edge of this century, so 3 centuries over some 200, 150, 200 years, and they found that centrality. So what I like about McCarthy and the writers I named, and I could include Zora Neale Hurston in that as well, that if you tell the personal story with such precision, it becomes universal. It works in music, and where music and dance come together. Swan Lake is universal because it's so extraordinarily precise. Great art is so precise that it transcends its time and its place, right? Even when a great artist like Matisse could no longer do with a brush because of what age had brought upon him, he did it with a scissors and cut paper. And we say we could do that, but we know it's fluid in a way that we could never do. Picasso talked about the idea, I won't have his quote right, but the idea of trying to get back to that childhood innocence, right? What would it be to rediscover it? And I hope that's what we do too. When we heard about Chelsea, your background and all the things you're interested in, somewhere along the way, you and I hope a lot of people that mentored you in your life said to you that you don't have to just be one thing. Educators do. Some of the greatest acts we do is knowing when to get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It was a really great answer. And we'll all pray that we never become hewers of wood and drawers of water.
Well said. Well said indeed.
What kind of habits, so within staying within yourself, what kind of habits and qualities do you think would be essential for other people like me to go into leadership roles, to remember how to branch out?
I think the circle of people you associate with is important. I think you should have a mentor as long as you possibly can. I think that's ideal. I think the hardest part of leadership, so we have about, including adjuncts and part-time workers, we have about 1,000 employees here. And sometimes leadership is making a decision about the hiring of a person or closing down a project for the good of the whole. And I think that's hard. I was at a book signing in Washington, D.C. I was acting chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, but not confirmed yet by the U.S. Senate. And I sat down by the person who I'd known as a civil servant, and she had run the agency under President Obama in a very similar way. I don't think I'm not going to mention her name, but I don't think the illusion would bother her. And we were talking, and she said it was a great surprise to her how lonely it is at the top. I don't think I've felt that. Now I'm a gregarious Southerner, so part of it is at the end of the day, I'll have more energy at the start, long as I'm talking with enough people. I'll come out of this podcast with more energy than I entered it. But for most people in leadership, you can't be fully transparent with why you're making a decision. If you tell them about the budget thing, it'll create anxiety you do not desire to create. They will think you made a change, and you'll never be able to say the person wanted out of that role. It was too much pressure on them, that role. They sought that change. So you'll be the one who's seen as making a change that worked against somebody, and you'll keep that secret for 20 years, as I have in some cases for 30 years. Leadership is, if you have a leadership team that isn't able to tell you you're wrong, then either it's not a leadership team or you're not a leader. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true.
That's important.
Now, what I have said to our leadership team here and other places is, if you tell me I'm wrong on a decision that I'm going to make, I'm going to say, well, what about this and what about that and why? And we need to be comfortable in that interaction, that it's not, oh my goodness, I've opened up a hornet's nest with them, So it's somebody said it's wrong. Okay, if I just need a poll or 3 people out of 5 for this or against this, that's easy to do. But if it's a trade-off, then I need to know why. Why do you feel that way? And so you need a team that will not only challenge you, but is willing to back it up, and they're not intimidated by being asked to back it up. And that is something that's earned. It's uncommon for that to be given to you.
Right. President Peede, we always finish with an advice question. Is there one piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you were a student?
Yes, and let me melt it down. I wish that I had known that successful leaders struggle with self-confidence. It wasn't that I was making a 4.0 in the sciences and then walked away. I was struggling with the quality of the material, my own interest in the material. I believe that my family was paying tuition for 4 years for me to live in the library. And if I had a good book in my hand and class started at 9, sometimes I showed up at 9:20 because I wanted to get through the chapter. I think that I did not have confidence in myself, and I thought that everybody else had their act together, and I did not. Also, going from high school where A's came quite easily, I think entire years I don't even remember taking books home. It's a small school and with limited challenges but a rich experience. And I got to college, and you certainly had to take the books home, to the dorm. And I went through a lot of grief, and that if I had more confidence, I just had somebody said, it's a struggle now and again for all of us. That would have been something. And I don't know about y'all, but I needed that at the time. I needed it more when I was young than when I was older, because I had then been around enough leaders. I had been around really decent people that had a war go very differently than they thought it would. You could see somebody's hair going gray in 3 years in federal service. at the White House. And so by the time I was my age, I knew that leaders struggled with the decision and the righteousness of their decisions. I wish I had known it young. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of this exceptional episode of Wings of Wisdom. I'd like to thank my co-hosts, Chelsea and Andrew. And also I'd like to thank David Grimes, our amazing senior instructional designer, for producing this episode. And finally, a huge thank you to our guest, President Peede, for sharing some of his wisdom and experiences with us. President Peede, we appreciate your passion, mindfulness, and all the wisdom you bring to our campus and community.
Oh, well, thank you. And I will add this to my podcast. There's before I came on the show, I listened in and learned about it. And what I really appreciate is, at a certain level, you're saying, what are the habits of mind we should cultivate? And I'll try to footnote you when I steal one of your ideas, okay? But thank y'all for such insightful questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for answering very insightfully.
Yeah, thank you for your time and for being part of the podcast. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Best.
Thank you for tuning in to the WoW podcast, where curiosity meets inspiration. Brought to you by the Writing and Communication Center at Ashland University.